Hello, and welcome to another video in module number 1, the building blocks of life. In previous videos, we talked about atoms and how atoms come together to form molecules. Some examples of molecules include DNA, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. And these molecules we discussed are very important for life. Particularly, they are very important for our cells. Our cells use these molecules for energy and to build different structures inside of our cells. Cells are so important to learn about because cells are the small building blocks that create our organs. And our organs have to work well for our body to be healthy. Today, we will be learning more about cells, continuing from our previous video, and specifically, we will be learning about small structures inside of cells called organelles. You can see in this diagram here, there are many small structures inside the cell. We call them organelles, and the purpose of today's video is to help you understand more about these structures. We have here another diagram of a cell. This one is more detailed, and I just want to emphasize that learning about the organelles within cells will help you to understand more about medicine. Many drugs that we use interact with cells, and they can have different effects on different organelles within cells. And so the more you understand about these organelles, it can help you understand how those drugs work. Additionally, many times our cells can have problems, whether because we are sick or because of mutations, because of mistakes in the DNA. And so the more you understand about the different parts of cells, that will help you to understand more about medicine. Now, just a reminder on this slide, the material in these videos and on this website is meant to help support you in your education and to support your learning efforts. It does not replace getting a true education in medical science, and it does not replace getting training on how to take care of patients. And to make sure that you are taking care of patients safely, you must follow the direction of your local health authorities and local training institutions, because guidelines in medicine can change and they can also vary from place to place. So make sure that you are in touch with and following up-to-date information from your local health authorities. All right, now I'm going to give you a short summary of the different organelles within a cell. Then in the following slides, we will go into more detail about each one. To start, we will talk about the nucleus. We talked a little bit about the nucleus in our previous video. Here, I'll focus in on the nucleus specifically. The nucleus is often thought of as being the center of the cell, even though it can be located in different locations around the cell. But the nucleus is very important. And can you remember what is inside the nucleus? Inside the nucleus, we have the DNA that contains your genes. It contains your genetic information. And the genes give instructions to the cell on how to make proteins. And the proteins are what builds different structures in the cell and different structures in your body. And those genes determine a lot about your body and who you are. For example, those genes determine whether you have dark hair or light hair, or if you have brown eyes or blue or green eyes. your genes can also determine whether you have certain diseases or conditions that can be inherited from your parents. And so we will talk a bit more about genes and how genes are transcribed and then translated to make proteins in your body. After we talk about the nucleus, we will talk about a common enzyme called a ribosome. You can see here in the diagram, there are many of these small red structures in the cell, and they represent an enzyme called a ribosome. Now, an enzyme might be a new word to you. Enzyme. An enzyme is a special protein in your cell that helps chemical reactions to occur. So enzymes can help put together different molecules, or they can split molecules apart. And ribosomes are very important because they can use information from your DNA. The ribosome can use information from your DNA to make proteins. And I will draw the protein as these little molecules that are all attached together. And then those proteins can be folded and arranged to make important structures in your cell that can do jobs to keep you healthy. So we will talk a bit about ribosomes. We will then discuss a little bit about this structure here around the nucleus. It is called the endoplasmic reticulum. And the endoplasmic reticulum, you can see it has a lot of those red ribosomes attached to it. The endoplasmic reticulum is a place where many proteins are made, and it can also help process toxins to help protect your cell from toxic molecules that might be in your body. We will then talk about this structure here. This structure is called the Golgi apparatus, and it is important for making sure that proteins are ready to be used in your cells and for sending the proteins to the right place. So the Golgi apparatus can send the proteins to somewhere else in your cell, or it can even send them out into the rest of your body to do an important job outside of the cell. After the Golgi apparatus, we will talk about an important process in your cell called cellular respiration, and it occurs in two main places. The first part occurs in the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is all of this area here, like jelly, all of this area outside of the nucleus, right? The nucleus is here in the middle, and outside of it we have the cytoplasm. And so to start, we will talk about how sugar and other nutrients can come into your cell, and they will be processed in the cytoplasm. Then they will move from there into this organelle called a mitochondria. And in the mitochondria, the nutrients are processed even further to make an important chemical called ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and this chemical is important for providing energy in your cells. After we talk about the mitochondria and how your cells generate energy, we will talk about lysosomes and peroxisomes. These are structures in your cells that help break down unwanted materials. For example, maybe some of the organelles in your cell are getting old and worn out. And so inside of one of these structures, your cell can break it down and recycle the parts to use later. Also, if there are bad chemicals or waste chemicals, your cells can break them down here for recycling. We will then talk about other structures inside the cytoplasm and in the cytosol that help give your cell strength and structure. And these are long proteins that can help your cell to keep its correct shape and do the important jobs it needs to do. Finally, to finish the video, we will review a little bit more about the cell membrane. Right? The cell membrane is like the skin on the outside of your cell that helps keep everything inside. Right? And by what's inside, we have the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm includes the cytosol, all this space in between the organelles, and it includes the organelles also. So there's the cytosol, and then the cytoplasm includes the organelles as well. So the cell membrane keeps in the cytoplasm and the nucleus here in the center, everything inside the cell. All right, on to our next slide. So here we will talk about the nucleus. I'll draw a cell for us. So let's draw our cell membrane. And inside the cell membrane, we have the nucleus. And in the nucleus, that's where the DNA is stored. So here's some DNA. Now you might remember earlier I talked about enzymes. And enzymes are special proteins that make chemical reactions happen. In the nucleus, there is a special enzyme called DNA polymerase. I will draw it like this. And so just to help us keep track here, I will label some of our structures. This here is the DNA. And here in the purple, we have DNA polymerase. And the DNA polymerase, it is an enzyme that travels along the DNA and it makes a copy of the DNA. But this copy, it's slightly different than your regular DNA, and we call it mRNA. So I will draw the mRNA coming out from the polymerase here. Now this mRNA, it leaves out of the nucleus. There are small holes in the wall of the nucleus where the mRNA can leave, and it goes out into the cytosol, the liquid that is outside the nucleus but still inside of the cell membrane. And so here we have our mRNA, and the mRNA, it's a copy of a gene on our DNA. And the DNA has the instructions for our cell how to build proteins. So it takes this mRNA copy with the instructions out to the cytosol, where it will meet with another protein called a ribosome. And I will draw the ribosome in red like the other diagram. So here is our ribosome. And the ribosome will move along the mRNA, and it will make a protein following the instructions. You might remember on DNA that there are the bases that we represent with letters, like this. And every 3 letters gives instructions for one amino acid, which is a molecule. The ribosome follows the instructions on the mRNA, and it connects together all the amino acids to make a string of many amino acids that are attached together. So I'll draw it here on our cell now. Here we have all these amino acids that are in a string following the instructions of the mRNA. Now, this string of amino acids altogether will make a protein, but it's not ready yet. Usually it still has to be modified a little bit and prepared before it is finished to do its job in the cell. Okay. Now, once it is all put together, the chain of amino acids will go to a structure called the Golgi, or Golgi apparatus. And I will draw a diagram here of our Golgi apparatus. Once the chain of amino acids is brought in, it will be folded into the right shape, and there will be other molecules attached to it. So here I will put some green dots to represent other molecules that are attached onto it. And as it moves through the Golgi, it will be prepared for the job it is supposed to do. Once it has passed through the Golgi, it will be taken to its correct location in the cell. There are many places the protein could go. Our protein could end up going into the cell membrane, and it could be a part of the skin of our cell. Or maybe the protein will go into the nucleus and do an important job in the nucleus. Maybe it will go back through one of those holes into the nucleus and do a job in here. Or else maybe the protein needs to send a message to another cell in the body. So then the Golgi will make a small bubble with our protein inside. And that small bubble they call a vesicle. And when that vesicle gets to the outside of the cell, it will open up and let our protein come out. And then our protein can send a message and travel to another cell in the body to do its job outside the cell. So just to summarize for you, the Golgi apparatus here that we just discussed, it is important for sending proteins to the right location and getting them ready to do their job. Because even if our cell follows the DNA and makes the mRNA, and then from the mRNA makes the correct chain of amino acids. If that chain of amino acids doesn't get folded right and doesn't get prepared to do its job, then it won't be ready. And also, if that, once it is all ready to do its job, if it doesn't go to the right place, then the cell won't work properly, because some proteins need to be in the nucleus, some in the cytoplasm, others in the membrane, and others need to leave the cell. So the Golgi makes sure that the proteins go to the right place. Okay, I'll make some space. And now we will talk about another structure called the endoplasmic reticulum. How about I draw that in dark blue? The endoplasmic reticulum is often drawn as being close to the nucleus, and it has several different jobs. Some of the endoplasmic reticulum has a lot of ribosomes. Remember, ribosomes use the mRNA. They use the mRNA to follow the instructions and make proteins. And so this can be a place where lots of proteins are put together. But the endoplasmic reticulum also has other jobs in the cell. It has many enzymes. Remember, enzymes, they can help chemical reactions happen. Some of these enzymes help to get rid of toxins. Remember, we talked earlier about how toxins can come into the cell and they can cause damage, right? Some toxins can even kill your cell. And so to protect itself, the cell needs to be able to process these toxins. And so a lot of toxins are processed in the endoplasmic reticulum. So the toxin comes to the enzyme, and then the enzyme will break it up or change it so that it becomes something that is not poisonous to the cell. I'll draw that differently. I will have the toxin in yellow, and then let's say the toxin then gets changed into another chemical here that is safe for the cell. All right. Now, there are some things that can hurt your endoplasmic reticulum. For example, people who drink a lot of alcohol. The alcohol can cause damage to the endoplasmic reticulum. And when you don't have the endoplasmic reticulum anymore, then the cells build up more and more toxins until the cell eventually dies. And so this is one way that the alcohol can hurt your liver. Because you may have heard people who drink a lot of alcohol, it can cause their liver to die and make it so their liver doesn't work properly. Your liver has a lot of cells that use the endoplasmic reticulum to clean your blood and get rid of toxins. So if you drink too much alcohol and you damage those cells in your liver and you hurt the endoplasmic reticulum, then your liver cells can die. All right. Now on to our next slide. We will now talk about cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is a big fancy word for how cells generate energy that they can use, right? We talked earlier about some different molecules like sugar. Let me find a good color here. We talked about sugars. I hope I am drawing it correctly. There are many different sugar molecules. And we talked about lipids like fatty acids. And your cell needs to be able to take these molecules and make them into energy that it can use. And I told you there is a molecule called ATP that your cell likes to use for energy. That was supposed to be like a lightning bolt. Now, how does your cell take these chemicals and make energy? So the first part starts in the outer part of the cell. So let's draw our cell. Remember, out here we have the cytosol, and in here we have the nucleus. Now we also have another important organelle called the mitochondria. So for my demonstration here, let's say this black circle is a sugar molecule. Sugar can pass through the cell membrane and come into the cell. Once the sugar is inside of the cell, there are enzymes. You remember enzymes? And do you remember what enzymes do? Enzymes help chemical reactions happen in the cell. So there are lots and lots of different enzymes. And they will take that sugar molecule and they will break it into smaller and smaller pieces. Little collections of atoms. And then those pieces of the sugar will go into your mitochondria. And in the mitochondria, there are more enzymes. And those enzymes will help make ATP to give your cell energy. Now, there's a lot of details on these next slides, but don't worry, you don't have to remember all of it. It is just a brief review so you can understand these things when we talk about it in later videos. So this is a diagram here about how sugar is broken down step by step to make smaller molecules that can be used by your mitochondria. Remember the mitochondria. And in each step, to break down the sugar, there is an enzyme to help the chemical reaction happen. And every time there is the chemical reaction, the molecule changes a little bit, right? Some of the atoms get moved on the molecule. And so each enzyme does a small step to change the molecule until it is ready for the mitochondria. And during these steps in the chemical reactions, the enzymes make other molecules that help store energy. And you don't have to remember what these molecules are, just remember that it makes more molecules that store energy. Okay, now we are inside of the mitochondria. So imagine we are inside the mitochondria. And in our mitochondria, I'll draw another diagram here. In our mitochondria, there is another membrane inside of it that has enzymes. And so that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at this membrane right here. Now these molecules that we had that were made out in the cytoplasm, they come in to the mitochondria and they are broken down even more. And in a previous video, we talked about atoms, and we talked about, for example, a hydrogen atom. Remember, the hydrogen atom has a nucleus with a proton, and the proton has a positive charge, and around it, it has an electron. The electron has a negative charge. Now, the mitochondria, it will take the proton, and it will move the proton across the membrane over here. So there are lots of protons, and that's what these are here. These are proton. The letter H is for hydrogen, and it has a plus because there is no electron. The electron is gone. And so your mitochondria stores up a lot of these hydrogen ions, and then they pass through another enzyme. Remember, enzymes help chemical reactions happen. And so this enzyme has a special job when these hydrogen ions pass through, it makes ATP. It makes ATP. And this gives your cell energy. Here is a diagram of ATP. There are a lot of atoms here. You don't have to remember all of it, but just as a review, remember that N is for nitrogen, O is for oxygen. When there is no letter, that's where carbon is. Carbon, carbon. And here is phosphorus. And so this molecule has a lot of energy, and so your cell uses it to do jobs. All right, we just finished talking about cellular respiration, how your cell can take carbohydrates and fats and it can use them to generate energy. In the cytosol, it can break them down and make lots of molecules that then go into the mitochondria, and the mitochondria will make ATP for energy. Now we're going to talk about a different organelle that does the job of breaking down waste products in the cell. And there are some different names for these organelles. One is called a lysosome. Now, a lysosome, it is good at breaking down waste products and old organelles, right? Remember, there are lots of these different organelles like mitochondria or ribosomes or the endoplasmic reticulum. Some organelles and structures, when they are old and worn out, they can go to the lysosome. And the lysosome will take them and break them apart into lots of little pieces. And then those pieces can be used by the cell and recycled to make other things. Another structure is a peroxisome. A peroxisome can help get rid of molecules that could be harmful to the cell. For example, if we have toxins in the cell, some of these toxins could go into a peroxisome, and then they will have a reaction with other chemicals to become something that is safe for the cell, that won't hurt the cell. Now, I want to talk about another similar structure in cells. Some cells in our body help us fight germs. So imagine this here is a germ. I'll make it smaller. So we have a little germ here. Now, your cell, if this is an immune cell that helps to fight the germs, it can move towards the germ. And when the germ gets close, it can make a little balloon around the germ. And it can bring the germ inside, like it is eating the germ. And once the germ is all the way inside of your cell, and it is trapped in a little bubble, it can take a lysosome. And remember that lysosomes are really good at breaking things down, right? In the lysosomes, there is lots of acid. And there are enzymes that can help break apart structures. And so when this lysosome goes into this sac here around the bacteria called a phagosome, this is a lysosome and a phagosome. When they combine, then all these molecules and enzymes can destroy the bacteria, and the bacteria will die. And so that is important for our cell to fight infections when bacteria are coming in and infecting our bodies. All right, I'll clear up this slide. Let's see. And now, related to that, we will talk about another cell structure called the cytoskeleton. You have heard of our human skeleton, and the purpose of our skeleton is to make our body strong and to help us move. And our skeleton also gives us shape. Similarly, the cytoskeleton helps give our cells shape, and it helps our cells to move. And the cytoskeleton is made of lots of proteins. These proteins have different names, but often they are long structures in our cell that can help our cell to have shape. Also, the cell can move its skeleton, and that can help the cell to change shape and to move. For example, we talked about in our immune system, sometimes our immune cells have to take in bacteria. They call this phagocytosis. Phagocytosis. Phago means to eat. And so the bacteria is moved into the cell. In order for the cell to move, it has to use its cytoskeleton, all of these proteins here. And the cytoskeleton can move, and that will change the shape of the cell. Also, we talked earlier how there are different types of cells. For example, in our body we have muscle cells. And in our muscle cells, there are lots of proteins that make the muscle cell strong. And when our muscle needs to contract so that we can lift something or push on something, the cytoskeleton here will pull in all these proteins will pull inward, and that will make the cell get shorter. And that is how our muscles can pull on things. And so that is just a brief introduction to how the cytoskeleton works. Next, we will talk about the cell membrane. We have already talked about the cell membrane a couple times. The cell membrane is like the skin of our cell. But now we're going to talk a bit more in detail about it. And I believe on the next slide we're going to look at a close zoomed in picture of what the cell membrane looks like. So here we have a diagram of the cell membrane. And you can see the cell membrane has lots of molecules in it. Like here, these molecules are those phospholipids that we talked about in a previous video. We talked about how the phospholipids together can make a layer around our cell that helps keep the water outside the cell separate from the water inside the cell, right? Because there's the water that's outside of our cell, and then there's the water that's down inside our cell. So here, this area up on top, this is the water that's outside of the cell. And down here, this is the cytoplasm. This is all the stuff that is inside of your cell. Now the cell membrane, here in the middle, the cell membrane does lots of important jobs. For example, you can see in the cell membrane there are lots of proteins, lots of enzymes. And these enzymes do important jobs for your cell. For example, they can send signals to other cells. Also, they can receive signals. So if a protein comes from another cell and it attaches to one of the receptors on your cell membrane, then that receptor can send a message down into your cell telling your cell what to do. Also, many medicines that we take bind to the cell membrane of cells. So let's imagine here that this is a medicine. On your cell membrane, there might be a special protein that is waiting on the cell, and when that medicine comes and hits it, then that protein will send a message down into your cell, and that will change what your cell does. The cell membrane is also important for controlling which things can come into the cell and which things can go out of the cell. For example, earlier we talked about different ions. For example, there is sodium, and there is potassium and calcium. In this part of the image, we have a protein here that has a hole in it. It has a channel so that electrolytes can pass through it. Some things can pass through the cell membrane easily on their own. Other things, they have to it takes energy to move them across the cell membrane, and the cell can control if they cross. So some things that pass easily across the cell membrane are oxygen, right? Like oxygen that we breathe from the air. Oxygen can pass into your cells, and then your cells can use it for energy. And carbon dioxide can leave from your cell. Remember earlier we talked about mitochondria and cellular respiration? And how your body turns carbohydrates into ATP. Well, while your body is breaking down all these carbohydrates or breaking down fats, your body needs to use oxygen. So that oxygen comes into your cell, and when your body breaks down all the carbohydrates with the oxygen and it combines them, then it makes ATP, water, and it makes carbon dioxide. And so your cell needs to bring oxygen in to help make energy, and it needs to get the carbon dioxide out so that you can breathe it out. So carbon dioxide and oxygen are examples of things that pass across the cell membrane easily. There are also some other things that pass across, like hormones. You've probably heard of testosterone and estrogen. These are molecules that can pass through the cell membrane and go to the nucleus, and they can give instructions to your cells. There are also several vitamins that are small molecules that can pass into your cell and help your cell. There are some things, though, that your cell will control whether they cross or not. For example, many ions like sodium and potassium and calcium, they are controlled by the cell. So the cell will move them across if it wants to. And to move the ions, the cell uses ATP. Remember, ATP gives the cell energy? Well, the cell will use ATP to move these ions to where they're supposed to go. Also, certain molecules like drugs or even larger things like viruses, remember we talked about viruses? They will bind onto the cell membrane, and then the cell will bring them inside, and then they can infect your cells. So these are all important things that relate to your cell membrane. And we will probably talk about that more in some of our later videos. All right, we are now almost to the end of the video. I will do a brief review for you now about what we talked about today to help you remember it. And then once you're done watching the video, please feel free to do the practice questions in the quiz. I hope that the quiz can help you to review what we talked about and remember it better for the future. And as always, if you have questions about what we talked about today, or if you have suggestions to make these videos better, please send a message to me, or on this page you can leave a comment. If you scroll down on the page, you can leave a comment and put in your email address and tell me what you think we can do to make these videos better. But for review, we'll talk about the nucleus. Here in the center of the cell, we have the nucleus. And do you remember what is in the nucleus? In the nucleus, there is the DNA. And our cell uses enzymes to make reactions happen. One enzyme in the cell is DNA polymerase. And it goes along your DNA and it makes a copy of your genes called mRNA. mRNA. So it takes your DNA and makes mRNA. Then, in your cell, that mRNA travels out of the nucleus and goes to a ribosome. And remember these red structures here, these are the ribosomes. And when your mRNA gets to the ribosome will make a protein. And a protein is a collection of lots of amino acids attached to each other. Then those amino acids will go to the Golgi. And in the Golgi, they get folded into the right shape. So they get folded into the right shape. And there are other molecules added, like these green dots, other molecules that are added. And then from the Golgi, your protein can go to lots of places. It could go to the cell membrane, and it could become an enzyme in the cell membrane. Or maybe it could go to the nucleus and do jobs in the nucleus. Or it could be in the cytoplasm, like a ribosome in the cytoplasm, or like the cytoskeleton, the skeleton of your cell. It could become part of the cytoskeleton, or an organelle like the mitochondria, or else the protein could go out of your cell and do a job somewhere else. We also talked about the endoplasmic reticulum. You can see here around the nucleus we have the endoplasmic reticulum. It has a lot of those red ribosomes that help make proteins. It also helps to process toxins. And we talked about how your liver uses the endoplasmic reticulum to process toxins so that they don't hurt your cells and don't hurt your body. We also talked about how if you drink too much alcohol, it can damage the endoplasmic reticulum and it can hurt your liver and make your liver cells die. Then we talked about cellular respiration. And cellular respiration is how your body takes nutrients like sugars and fats, and it turns them into energy that it can use. So these molecules come into the cytosol, right? It comes into the cytosol, this water in the outer part of the cell, and there the nutrients meet with enzymes. And these enzymes will break down the sugar and the fats, and it will make lots of smaller molecules. And then these smaller molecules will go to the mitochondria. Now, in order to break down these molecules and process them, your cell needs oxygen, and the oxygen can pass through the cell membrane and get in to your cell so it can use it for cellular respiration. Once these molecules are all broken down in the cytosol and even more in the mitochondria will make ATP for your cell, and the ATP gives your cell energy. It also makes carbon dioxide, and this carbon dioxide can leave through the cell membrane and leave the cell. We also talked about lysosomes and peroxisomes. Lysosomes and peroxisomes are small bubbles in the cell where the cell breaks down waste products. For example, maybe worn out organelles or proteins that are old and worn out in the cell. The cell can move them to a lysosome and break them down into little pieces, and then it can use those pieces to build other things. Also, certain toxins or molecules, they can be broken down in peroxisomes so that they are no longer dangerous to your cell. We also talked about a phagosome, which is how a bacteria can be taken into certain immune cells, and once inside, the bacteria will be killed. We talked about the cytoskeleton, which is a collection of proteins inside your cell. You can see here these are long proteins in your cell that make up the cytoskeleton. or the cell skeleton. And the cytoskeleton is important because it helps give your cell the right shape, and it can help your cell to move and do other jobs it needs to do. We then finished by talking about the cell membrane. We talked about how in the cell membrane there are lots of different enzymes, different proteins called enzymes that do jobs. We talked about how drugs or different chemicals could come and they could bind onto your enzymes called receptors, and then they will send messages into your cell telling your cell what to do. We also talked about how some things like oxygen or certain hormones or vitamins can pass through your cell easily, all by themselves. However, other things need help to move through your cell. For example, some electrolytes like sodium and potassium and calcium, these atoms need help from your cell to move through. And your cell will control how much of them cross over. And this is important for many different types of cells because your cells will use these electrolytes to do important jobs. All right. Well, now we are at the end of the video. In our upcoming video, we will talk about some other functions that cells do. And so these important functions will help you be prepared for the later videos where we talk more about medicine and your organs. For example, this diagram talks about how cells can divide and rearrange their DNA into unique copies. And this is important for reproduction. This is important for how new humans are born, and we all have unique DNA. For example, you don't look exactly like your mom or like your dad. You look similar to your mom and similar to your dad because you have some DNA from both of them. And that DNA came together and made you. And so in the next video, we will talk about how cells from your mom and your dad reorganized the DNA and got it ready to make you. We will also talk a bit about fluids in the body and how these fluids can affect your cells. And so this next video should be very helpful as you prepare for the later modules. Thank you for watching, and also thank you to all the people who made the images that I have used in this presentation.